This Senate hearing took a serious turn after Senator Gary Peters warned that the Iran conflict is starting to directly hurt Americans through rising gas prices, fertilizer costs, and economic pressure. But the most striking moment came when he challenged Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on whether the administration even has a real strategy to end the war.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Gentlemen, welcome to the committee. I appreciate this discussion. I'll just start off. The number one question I get when I'm back home from people is basically very simply, when will this war end? We know the costs are that the American people are paying, both in higher fuel costs, our farmers are paying because of fertilizer cost. We know that the whole world economy is paying a great deal for this war. And basically, as I think that through, and this is what I want to talk to you about, is that we all know that it's a whole lot easier to go to war than it is to get out of war. That's always the tough question. And we've got to figure that out. And there are some folks who've written quite a bit about this. One text on war by Karl von Clausewitz. Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you're familiar with the book. I know all of the men and women in uniform are. It's the most widely read, most influential military strategy book in Western history, which is pretty broad. And it is the core curriculum that is read in all the war colleges. I read it when I was at the Navy War College taking courses. It's part of what the U.S. military thinks about when to go to war and then how to get out of the war. And one of those core principles it starts with is basically war is the continuation of politics by other means. That everybody knows that quote who's worn the uniform, and others too. And basically it means there's two things about that. It's politics to get in the war, and it's politics to get out of the war. And in between, we rely on the men and women in the military to carry out those policies. So I want to be clear, and I think I speak for all of my colleagues, is that we know the military plays an important part. They need to do their job. And nobody questions the amazing work that our men and women in the U.S. military have done and continue to do. They've performed absolutely brilliantly, and we applaud all that they have done. However, what we do question is the politics part. It's a continuation of politics. So it's our political leaders that get us into war and our political leaders who have to get us out of that war, which falls on you, Mr. Secretary Hegseth, and others in the administration, including the President as Commander-in-Chief. So, Secretary, are you familiar with the concept in that book of center of gravity?
Sure.
So center of gravity is basically, as you know, it's basically the hub of all the power and movement. Everything depends on it. And Clausewitz will say if you don't take out the center of gravity, it's very difficult to win the war. You can have tactical successes, you can have military successes, but if you're not focused on that, you're not going to be able to win. Basically, he talks about military strikes are tactical, and tactical success doesn't necessarily create the political conditions necessary to get the parties to the table to negotiate and get it done. So we've got to focus on that. So my question for you, Mr. Secretary, what is the center of gravity for Iran?
Well, the center of gravity, as the President has seen it and as I see it, and he's talked about for 30 years, is their pursuit of a nuclear weapon and what they could do with that in pursuit as an extension of the radical ideology they have professed since the beginning of their revolution. So the prophetic ideology they profess alongside the most dangerous weapon in the world would be the center of gravity of the rationality of this undertaking, which
I appreciate it. I'll ask you to elaborate more. I appreciate it. General Caine, you know more about Clausewitz and strategy than I will ever know, including all the folks behind you. What would you consider the center of gravity as defined by Clausewitz in this type of war?
Well, sir, you're not going to love this answer, but I hope you'll respect it. War is politics by any other means.
Right.
And the political side of that necessitates that our political leaders determine what is the center of gravity associated with that. From a military-only perspective, there's a variety of things academically that we could look at for center of gravities, from leadership to will to capabilities to intent. But I'll defer to our political leaders to determine
that's
what
fine.
that is.
That's fair. I don't like it. You're right. But
I know, sir.
And I know you know the answer to that, and you're just not telling me.
Well,
I get why you're doing that.
My inner
But
marshal.
I would say, you know, other observers say that basically it's not the leader. Usually, if you take out a leader, that doesn't necessarily make the changes. That in Iran's case, it's probably the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. That's the center of gravity. They're the ones that control the country, and they're very diverse to do that. The Americans' center of gravity is probably our economy and our ability to maintain public opinion support. We already know the public isn't there. We know the impact to our economy. And central to that is the leverage. And I'm running out of time here, but the central of leverage is the Strait of Hormuz. That is bottom line. We have to open that up. We have to take that away from Iran. The fact that we haven't done that yet, and we're 60 days in, we're just now bringing minesweepers from the Pacific in there. We have some unmanned opportunities, but we've got to have the capacity to do that. It was clear, even if there was a plan to keep the straits open, it was not going to be implemented because the assets were not positioned in a place to actually open the straits. If they were, we would have seen those happening right now. We're not. So we're missing the point here. The center of gravity is going to be bringing down the government of Iran in a way that they will want to have a peace treaty so we can protect our country from having nuclear weapons pointed our way. But the center of gravity is going to be, in a lot of ways, is going to be focused on what happens on the straits. And Mr. Secretary, we've got to see action a whole lot sooner in the straits. The world community needs it. We're not going to bring this war to an end until we seize control of the straits in a way
which in part is why we have a blockade that has been impenetrable for the Iranians, because they don't have a conventional navy to contest it, which means we control the straits.
The time of Senator Peters has expired. Let me observe that I very much appreciate the senator from Michigan suggesting ways in which our effort in Iran could be more successful. I do appreciate that. And let me also observe, Senator Caine, that civilian control goes back well beyond Marshall. It goes back to George Washington, who was wise enough to resign his commission to the elected membership of the government at that.
This hearing stood out because it wasn't dominated by shouting, personal attacks, or political one-liners. Instead, it felt like something more dangerous, a warning that America may be drifting deeper into a conflict without a clear path out. Senator Gary Peters approached the Iran war discussion from a strategic perspective rather than a purely partisan one. And honestly, that made his questions harder to dismiss. Right from the beginning, Peters focused on the question many Americans are increasingly asking: how does this war end? That framing mattered because history has shown that starting wars is often politically easier than ending them. Peters even referenced the famous military strategist Karl von Clausewitz, whose writings remain foundational in modern military planning. His broader point was simple but important: military victories alone do not automatically create political solutions. And that's where the hearing became especially revealing. Peters repeatedly stressed that while the U.S. military has performed professionally and effectively, tactical military success does not necessarily mean America is strategically winning the larger conflict. In other words, destroying targets is not the same thing as ending a war. That distinction became central to the hearing. Peters argued that the real pressure point in this conflict is the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important shipping routes. Because regardless of battlefield successes, if global shipping remains disrupted, Americans will continue feeling the consequences through rising fuel prices, inflation, and economic instability. And politically, that changes everything. Americans may tolerate foreign conflicts when the costs feel distant. But once wars begin affecting gas prices, farming costs, airline tickets, and daily living expenses, public patience can erode quickly. That's exactly what Peters was warning about. The hearing then shifted into a more strategic debate over what military thinkers call the center of gravity, essentially the core source of power that determines whether a war can ultimately be won. Hegseth argued Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons and its ideological ambitions represented the true center of gravity, but Peters appeared unconvinced. He suggested the administration may be missing the larger strategic reality, that control of the Strait of Hormuz itself could become the defining issue determining whether the war escalates, stabilizes, or drags on indefinitely. And that's what made this exchange significant. Because beneath the military terminology and strategic theory was a deeper concern. Does the administration actually have a realistic political endgame? Peters openly warned that America risks becoming trapped in another prolonged Middle East conflict, If leaders focus too heavily on tactical military operations without establishing broader political objectives and exit conditions. At several points, he implied the administration was presenting the conflict as more successful than conditions on the ground actually suggest, especially regarding shipping disruptions and the continuing economic fallout. Hegseth pushed back strongly, insisting the United States effectively controls the strait through overwhelming naval dominance, and that Iran lacks the conventional naval power necessary to challenge American forces directly. But Peters clearly believed that if shipping disruptions continue, then practical control of the region remains far less secure than officials are publicly claiming. And honestly, that disagreement may reflect the biggest issue Americans are wrestling with right now: whether this conflict is moving toward resolution, or toward something much larger and longer lasting. This hearing also highlighted another important theme. Civilian leaders, not military officers, ultimately decide the political goals of war. That distinction surfaced when General Caine carefully avoided directly defining Iran's strategic center of gravity, emphasizing instead that political leadership determines national objectives, while the military carries them out. That moment may seem subtle, but it revealed something important about the tension between military expertise and political decision-making during wartime. Because ultimately, the military can execute missions successfully while political leaders still struggle to define what victory actually means. And history shows that uncertainty can become extremely dangerous during long conflicts. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is the administration handling the Iran conflict strategically? Or are lawmakers like Senator Peters right to worry that America could be sliding deeper into another prolonged war without a clear endgame? And for more political analysis and hearing breakdowns, subscribe to The State Lens.